what I'd like to do right now is take a moment, and in reference to this study, I want us to look at something that's a little intense, and we're going to look at some stuff regarding the second coming of Messiah. That portion of it, as far as him coming back onto the scene again now after his ascension. And I want us to look at that very closely and understand it, because it's an area of Scripture that I believe is not always properly taught, and we're going to make up for that right now. So we're going to do a review of the second coming of Messiah. And most expositors, when you study the second coming of Messiah, almost unanimously, it's not all, but a high percentage, actually reference Zechariah chapter 14 in verse 4. And I'll read it to you in Zechariah here in chapter 14. Let me find, here it is, in verse 4. And it says, "And in that day, his feet," in reference to Yeshua, "his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move toward the north, and half of it toward the south." And so the reference is that Messiah will actually return back to the area where he ascended into heaven, and we'll talk on that. And that's the Mount of Olives, the site of Yeshua's ascension. That, by the way, that area, just for the record here, that area, and this is again a portion of Scripture that isn't oftentimes shared, that location happens to be the exact location where God's glory departed prior to the Babylonian captivity. In essence, what we're told by the prophet Ezekiel is that prior to the invasion of Nebuchadnezzar, prior to his coming to Jerusalem and destruction of Jerusalem, or just the capture of Jerusalem, really, he didn't destroy anything at first. It wasn't until the third invasion in 586 BC that the temple was actually destroyed. But prior to the invasion, Ezekiel describes for us rather meticulously the departure of God's glory. Now remember, God's glory was housed, of course, in the Ark of the Covenant, under the cherub. Under the cherub was housed in that area. That's where God's glory was. He was dwelling among his own people. But in Ezekiel chapter 9, in verse 3, Ezekiel says to us, "Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherub." Now there it is, gone up from the cherub, where it had been to the threshold of the temple. God's glory had now come out of the Ark of the Covenant. It had come out. It had been sitting in the Holy of Holies up to this point. And in chapter 10 of Ezekiel, and in verse 4, it says, "Then the glory of the Lord went up from the cherub and paused over the threshold